And going to... Okay, so hopefully I'm still being listened to by everybody. If anybody wants to send me a quick chat confirmation, that'd be great. But as you can see, what I did with these then is I just went through each assignment, copied what the participant had sent in. Thank you, Tiffany. And kept the format exactly the way it was so that you could see there's a lot of different varieties for how you're going to format your documents, when it comes to whether you're going to use graphic lines, colors, different fonts that you're going to use. So as we look at each of these, when the participant gave me a little tip, like on this first one, I made sure I included that. So the rationale here was to move the education to the end of the resume because Candace has more than 9 years of experience. And, of course, the rationale there would be that with 9-plus years of experience, the experience may have a higher precedence than the actual education. But as you'll see as we go through these, some people felt that the education should come up higher. So with this one, we've got both degrees are listed, the dates, the name of the school, nice little format. The second example that was turned in, the writer decided that the AS degree may not be as relevant, so they did not include that. And I'm presuming that they are including this in a section under education that would be at the end of the resume. And again, it's, just another strategy, whether you want to put the date by it, whether you want to put it on the right margin. We're going to talk a little bit more when we get to the formatting about actually getting this over on the right margin. The next example here uses a nice shaded headline. And again, this writer chose to just focus on the Bachelor of Applied Science degree with the date and the college. And again, when we get to the lesson on formatting, we'll talk a little bit more about how to create a little more white space here between the heading and the information that's under that. So then the next one said, I placed the education section immediately beneath the narrative, the summary section. And this is based on it being a recent date. Additionally, I give distinction between the 2 degrees. So this is just another way of looking at it. And I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong, but I think there is a good case for an argument that her recent bachelor's degree may be a stronger selling point than her work experience. And again, whether or not you include the AS and where you put it, these are all options. But I wanted you to consider that there's several different ways of looking at it. And always, keeping in mind that what you're trying to do is give the client the best competitive advantage. So this next one, again, indicated I'd put Candace's information at the end of the resume. And this writer went on to say they would not include the AS because it does not appear to be relevant to her interest in working as a service or parts manager or sales representative. Yes, no, it could be looked at many different ways. Again, there is no absolute right or wrong. I might make the argument that the instrumentation and control technology showed a technical side of her that may enrich her ability to understand heavy equipment parts and service. So it really depends on where she's going as to whether or not it is relevant. And then I thought this next statement was pretty pertinent. I would not include the Microsoft Office computer as this, at least not in this section, since it's a pretty basic skill. I just recently read a blog post indicating that would be one thing you would not need to put on a resume is that you know Microsoft Office. Because like this writer said, it has become a basic skill. On the other hand, I might make the argument that if the job announcement itself specifies that knowledge of Microsoft Office and or Word, Excel, PowerPoint was a job requirement, to make it keyword optimized, I may go ahead and include it. However, it would not be included under education. When it comes to the education section, primarily what you're going to look at are college degrees or perhaps certifications if they are the only formal education. But in other cases, you'll want to break out education and certifications. So if it's just a class or a particular technical skill, you may want to put that in a different category. This one I thought I really liked because this one took a little bit of a unique approach, and this is one that I use quite frequently. This writer said they would put Candace's education under its own heading at the bottom of the resume, but speak to her ability to earn the degree while working full-time in her professional profile. So what you would be doing there is actually calling it out up front on the resume and even using that extra competitive advantage by saying that she earned that degree while she was working full-time. It's one of those things that may distinguish her from other candidates. But then moving the rest of the education information to a standalone section at the end of the resume. So nice strategy with that writer to kind of combine the two. The next one is just listing both degrees again with the dates. And one thing about the dates is, I think I mentioned this last week, if the degree was earned, general rule of thumb, within the last, 5 years, include the dates. However, there are situations where there may be a significant gap here. Maybe she earned the AAS back in, let's say, 99, and the BAS is current. If you decide to list both degrees and you decide to give the date for one, for consistency, give the date for both of them. So just keep that in mind if you're working with a client that has more than one degree, and we'll actually see this show up in the other two exercises. Next example, just a different formatting again, but basically the one-line description. And it's interesting when you look at this how some of you chose to put it all in one line, some of you chose to put it in two. Another strategy that you'll want to take into consideration: do you have the room on the resume? Do you need to tighten things up? Can you make less spacing between two lines of text? Use the incremental spacing, or do you want to put them right next to each other? So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. And then the final one that was on here is just another one that's using a breakout of the two different degrees with the dates. And we're going to cover this in tonight's class, but this colon that exists after the heading, grammatically, do not include a colon after a main heading. So you can just make a note. If that's yours and you have a tendency to do that, just make a note, no colon after a main heading. So let me unmute the line, see if anybody had any comments or questions.
305.
Okay, and this will give me a good chance to kind of confirm who's on the line again, too. Christina, are you on the call?
I am, yes.
Yeah, any questions or comments?
Not so far. I think it makes sense, all the different approaches that we can take.
Digital forensics and information technology.
That radio is back again. I don't know whose radio that is or how it shows up.
It's me. I don't know how that shows up. I'm sorry.
I don't know what's causing that, but
hold on. Oh my gosh, let me get it off.
I'm not sure who's working with that. Anyhow, let me go down the line. Doug, did you have any questions or comments about this?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand. Let's see, the one that starts on the second page of your examples, the one that says I would anchor Candace's page with her education at the bottom as follows. I didn't quite get the full layout of the resume where that fits.
Okay, so this writer is saying they would create an education section at the end of the resume, and that's where they would put all the details about the education. However, the writer is also saying in the professional profile, top section of the resume under the letterhead. Oh, my. But everybody just put *6 if you're not actually the person that's speaking, and that'll mute your own line. I don't know what causes that. So, and to finish my thought on that then, Doug, it's actually taking and including a sentence in the professional summary that says something to the effect of earned bachelor's degree while attending or while working full time.
Okay, okay. I wasn't reading it carefully enough to see the professional profile at the top. Got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Oh, I wish I knew what to do about that radio situation.
Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Our programs include digital forensics and information technology.
Would everybody *6 their line?
Learn more at edcc.edu/STEM.
I don't know what is causing this, and it's really...
Do you still hear the radio? Do you still hear... Hello, Noreen, it's Ronnie. Do you still hear the radio?
I'm not hearing it now.
Okay. I finally got my tech to come in because I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay. I hope
I
hope I can go on now.
Yeah,
Tiffany Bidding, are you on the phone?
Thank you.
Okay. How about Sheila? Are you on the phone? Now I probably have everybody muted, and that's why nobody's out talking to me. If you did mute your line with a *6, then I believe you unmuted by doing a *6. So, Ronnie, I know you were there. Did you have any questions or comments about this exercise?
No.
Okay, great. How about you, LJ? Are you on the line still?
Yes, and it's just nitpicking. Do we need to pay attention to detail around the B period, A period, S? Is it period, comma? Is there no comma? Does it matter?
No,
as long as you're consistent?
No, that is good nitpicking, and I'm glad that you brought it up. It may even be something I'll cover in the grammar. That whole issue of whether you put the periods after the B and the A and the S, as long as you're consistent, whether they have the periods or they don't have the periods is perfectly acceptable. You just want to be consistent. Whether or not you put the comma, typically the comma is there, and I can't give you a specific as whether or not it has to be there. I think it's a matter of preference. What we don't like is this example where it says Bachelor of Science in Business Management. It would be much better to say Bachelor of Science, comma, Business Management. Another one you don't want to do is Bachelor of Science degree in. So it's the main thing is keeping it concise. So if we go back to this one that's just BAAS, comma, Business Management, perfectly fine. If you want to put the periods in there and the comma, perfectly fine. Just be consistent. And try to stay away from extra wording like in or degree. It's not necessary to have it. But thanks for bringing that up, LJ.
Thank you.
Suzanne, how about you? Are you on the line?
Yes, I am. And
do you have any questions?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, though.
Okay, you're welcome. Tiffany Roberts?
I'm good.
Okay. Brenda?
No, I'm clear.
All right, Mark. This one was the easier one, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm here, and I don't have any questions or comments at this point.
Okay, great. Well, then let me go on to exercise number 2. I'm going to mute the line again. Hopefully we'll bring everybody back. We won't have that commercial on the radio. So hang on a second here. exercise 2 is a little bit trickier because there was a lot more information there. And, several of you made the point, and it's a very valid point, that if you were actually working with the client, you may have asked for more clarity from them that would have helped you to complete this exercise a little bit better. But I just wanted to see what you were able to do, through your own critical thinking and analysis as to whether or not you would be able to do this. Sometimes when I'm working with a client, I've had clients that just really don't want to pay my fee. So I have offered a service where I just say, you know what? I'll edit and reformat your resume, and I'll only charge you X, but we're not going to get on the phone, and I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm only going to work with what you've given me. And in that case, it does take a little more critical thinking. What is it that I'm going to be doing since I don't really have the ability to ask any questions of the client? So with this one, I'm trying to find, okay. With this one, everything was listed together, and where everybody really, picked up on it is it really makes more sense to put the certifications in a category by themselves and the education in another category by itself. So with this first example, the only thing that I might recommend to this writer, and we'll talk about this with the formatting, is see if you can tighten it up a little bit more. Put incremental line spacing between each area of certification and each education so that you can tighten it up. As you can see here, it's taking up considerable amount of space on the resume, and it may be necessary to tighten it up in order to be able to keep the resume at a acceptable length. You certainly don't want it to go to 3 pages because you've spread everything out so much. Another thing, and I'll point it out on this one, and this showed up in quite a few of the assignments. This candidate had 2 facilitator certifications. It might be beneficial to just combine them under one heading and then put the title of each one and the dates that they achieved those certifications. But other than that, there really is nothing that is wrong with this example. Just some other things I wanted to point out for you to think about. Of course, this one, you recognize this format again from exercise 1. And as with exercise 1, the only really significant recommendation I'd make on this is more with formatting, creating a little more white space between the heading and the actual degrees and certifications. And we will cover that later on. This particular example, too, is a good example, well, all of these, but it's what I was mentioning a little bit earlier, that even though this one degree was in 1998 and this one certification was in 1992, because the writer chooses to include the degree date for the master's, which is a relevant date, it's important that you're consistent and include it throughout. Everything else here looks like it's in good shape. The next one is laid out a lot like the first. The difference between these two is the first writer was giving the certifications higher ranking on the resume than the education. Remember the inverted pyramid, that we write with the most relevant information up high and we work our way down. Whether or not the certifications are of a higher quality than the education, it may depend on the position they're applying for. However, there is a good argument for putting the education first, because a master's of public policy may position the client for a higher level job than just an RNC certification. And it would have helped had we known what the client's job target was. So the same thing when we get down here, we've got the education and then the certifications. And notice the little squiggly line. We've got to really make sure that we're proofreading all of our assignments just like we proofread all of our resumes. So I always keep an eye out for that. If you send me a homework assignment and you didn't take the time to proofread it, it really concerns me about whether or not you're proofreading your work that you're sending the clients. Another thing that could be caught in proofreading here is we always should have a comma between a city and a state. So we're going to cover a lot of that tonight, but just be careful of those little things. This one, the writer kept the heading that was in the original assignment, but in all reality, that is not a very good heading. Academic preparation, certification preparation, it almost sounds like something that's kind of ongoing, and academic and certification preparation is a rather unorthodox heading. So when a recruiter, employer, an applicant tracking system is looking for information about a degree, it will look under the heading education, not academic and certification preparation. So remember that when I send you homework assignments, sometimes I build in little tricks. What our clients give us is not necessarily what we need to be working with. So they're going to rely on us to make decisions, to do things a little bit differently, and I want you to feel comfortable with the homework assignment, challenging what I gave you, and changing things if necessary. So this next one, I like this. Another good strategy is just center everything. Different font, the centering, it just creates a little bit of a different visual appeal. As with the previous ones, you could combine the facilitator certifications and list both courses, both dates on one line. Not that it's right or wrong one way or another. It's just another way to look at it. This particular one, again, it's that same format, gives you a little bit of an idea. This writer is using columns. It's a nice little breakout. If you choose to do columns like this or a table, then the tricky thing is with formatting it so that everything lines up nice and beautifully even like this is. This writer really took a lot of time to try to lay this out, and it looks real nice. This writer also chose to include the month with the year. So that is certainly an acceptable possibility, too. There's nothing wrong with that. This writer called out the fact that we don't know what the concentration was for the Master of Science. So that definitely would be something that you'd have an opportunity to clarify when you talk to the client. And then this writer is saying, I would ask the client to tie into the relevance of the two facilitator certifications. Again, some good critical thinking, because there is a question about, well, what does that mean? For us that are not familiar with this particular client or the occupation, it does beg the question, what is a It Takes Two corporation certification? So I think, this writer brought up some good points that are worth exploring. This one, like the other one, kept that silly little heading. Just keep in mind something like that isn't really going to work well. This one is choosing to use the colon after the actual degree title. There really isn't anything wrong with that format. What is not included here is the city and state. It could be very relevant, but really, to the writer's credit, they were consistent. So they didn't include it some places and not included others. The next one here is listing the education under one heading, certification under the other, of course, calling out the missing information. All of the commas are in here. The locations have only identified the state. I would say that if you're going to include the state, it's a good idea to also include the city. And you'll notice here's a little bit of an inconsistency. There's a comma after Ohio. There is no comma after Maryland. And I'm going to beat you to death with these things tonight when we go over that. And then there's the certifications are listed with the dates that they were earned. I question why 2 of them were earned and the other one was completed. Again, it's really important to be consistent in the way that you're presenting information. And then the final one is just a simple little wrap-up where it's got the college and location on one line, the degree, and the date on the other. Whether or not you put the date next to the college, you put it next to the degree, there isn't really a right or wrong way on that. A lot of it gets down to how are you formatting the resume, what's the optimum use of space, how do you create sufficient white space without creating too much. So it's really up to the individual writer when it comes down to things like that. But again, just keep in mind consistency and punctuation is really important. So let me try this again. I'll do a quick run through here. And I hope it stays so quiet this time. Sheila, I'm going to start with you. Questions or comments, Sheila? Okay, how about Mark? I'll just push it along so we don't run out of time tonight. Mark, you got any questions or comments?
No, I don't think so. You were quite clear on that. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Brenda?
No real questions, but I do wonder about the validity of including the month that the degree conferred.
I don't. Anybody that included the month, if you want to chime in, you can. I can't say that there's a validity or that there's not a validity.
I would like to chime in on that.
Yes, go ahead.
Because in your notes, in your PowerPoint, I thought it was not to include the month.
I'd have to go back and check on that. Mm-hmm. I think in some cases, like right now I'm working with a recent college graduate, and he graduated in the December. And because colleges, some of them are on quarters, some are on, semesters. Some people may graduate in the summer, some may graduate at the end of the winter term. In those cases, it may be relevant to let them know what month they graduated. And then to be consistent, you would need to do that for every degree that you're listing. It also may be an issue if it's a certification that has an expiration date, that maybe that expiration date is tied into the month. Those are the only, different options I can think of. I would not, and I'll go back and make sure that I didn't actually say specifically in a previous presentation not to include the month, because if I did say that, then I need to fix that, because I don't think it's an absolute. I think it's one of those it depends types of situation. Is that a good enough answer?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
And for me, because, for me, I understand a resume, you could ask like 10 people, you could get 10 different views. However, there is one solid format, for the most part, there's format that is, that we're trying to focus on. And for myself, because at the end, really, I'm trying to do what the National Resume Writers Association is for, certification. So for me, I'm going to follow that format every time, because that is my main goal, right? So for me, because I didn't realize that I actually had the Resume Magic book in my library, so that was great. So I went and I pulled up my library, and when I looked through her book and I saw many of her examples, because I tell myself, remember, you're in a learning stage. Undo what you've already
learned. I'm going to have to
learned,
cut you short,
right?
or we're going to run out of time tonight.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
So for me, when I come back to mine and I see that sometimes I said completed and sometimes I said earned, it was because it was the question, is it because one, she had a certification and then sometimes she was being certified? Is it the difference is one, what happens when one gets it earned and one gets it completed? So one day I'll ask you that separately at another time. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm always happy to address individual challenges with any of you. Even if you're currently working with a client, while you're in this class, if you would like to strategize with me on anything, or you have a particular question about a resume you're working on, shoot me an email. If I've got the time, I'll definitely get on a call with you and we'll figure it out. The best way to learn this stuff is by doing it, and that's why I give you these homework assignments and I go through them. But yes, I teach to the NCRW standards. However, even with the standards, there's a whole lot of stuff that the answer is it depends. And as writers, we have to know what reason we're giving for what we did. So even when I'm grading for the NCRW, if the writer can give me a good rationale for why they did something the way they did, and it's not, set in stone, then by all means, we'll let it fly. So we don't want anybody to think we're so rigid that there's only one way to do it, and it's the NCRW way. Let me move up my list here, then I can't remember. Tiffany, did you have a chance to speak to this one?
Oh, not yet. The only question I have is, say you're working with someone that's a little older and their college degree was in, 1980, but they had professional development or certifications that were, more current, so they, kept up on their industry. Would it be appropriate to leave the dates off under the education heading and put dates in the certification heading?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
As long as
Good,
you're being considered.
I'm glad because I've done that.
Yeah, and it is a good reason to break the two out. That's perfectly fine. Great question, though. Thank you. Suzanne.
Yes, I had a question about using lines and underlines on the resume. I was told a little while back not to do that because sometimes when you email your resume, those lines will break up and it kind of looks like you've made a mistake when you really haven't. Can you speak to that for me, please?
We'll talk about this more in the formatting class, but a lot of it goes down to how was that line created.
Okay.
And it really, what I have found is writers get really creative on how they're doing it. Was it done with a border? Did they use the underline key on the keyboard? Did they create a table and then hide some of the table borders? So it's real hard to say if it's breaking up over an email. Is it because of the way they formed the line, or was it the line itself? I tend to think it was the way the line was formed more than the line itself.
Okay, great.
And we'll cover a lot of that in the formatting session that we're going to do. LJ, comments, questions?
I'm good.
Oh, I'm so glad you're good. And Ronnie, you were just on the. Oh, you weren't. Okay.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, good. Tiffany Benning, did you get on the call yet? I don't know if she did. Doug?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, good. And Christina, are you on the call yet?
I am, yes. I just had a quick question. You mentioned that it's good generally to put this the city and state, but I'm wondering, is that needed in cases where it'd be redundant? So, for instance, if someone went to, University of California at Berkeley, you then wouldn't need to put Berkeley, California after that, right?
I wouldn't put it after it. I think that's a good point. Yeah. And the reality, too, while I'm standing here looking at that, because I had lived in Maryland, Johns Hopkins University actually has THE as part of the name. And I just caught that. I didn't even realize it until just now. It's actually the Johns Hopkins University, and that's a tricky one. So that kind of goes back to, too, we can't just rely on what our clients give us. Sometimes we have to do a little more research. And then Doug.
No,
I already did. Yeah, okay, good. So let me close this one and pull up the exercise through. I'll try to go through this one a little bit quicker because I don't want to run out of time here. And right now I'm doing okay with the line unmuted. So exercise 3, this first one was nice because they broke the professional development down into subsections. So they have 2 main sections, professional development and education. And then under the professional development, it's broken down into leadership, certifications, courses, and conference. So it's kind of a unique sort of approach. I don't see any really overriding issues with all of this. It's formatted nicely. The only improvement that might have been made is to tighten things up a little bit more with some incremental line spacing. Now, I gave a lot of you individual feedback when I got your assignment, but just as a reminder to everybody and those who didn't get the feedback, this particular one had a bit of a trick in it, and it was that nonprofit executive management certificate from Georgetown University. And I didn't expect that anybody would actually know this instinctively, because I didn't when I actually wrote this resume. But by doing research, I was able to find out, and this was not from the client, but from research, that a nonprofit executive management certificate from Georgetown University is equivalent to a master's degree. And I think only 2 of you may have picked that up. Everybody else was giving it lower priority than the bachelor's degree. So you'll see that throughout as we look at the assignments. And it's just another one of those situations where sometimes when we're not sure, we need to stop and take the time to do some research and, if possible, call the clients. Now, yesterday and today, I was grading tests for the NCRW. And I mentioned this before, when you take the test, you'll have a profile like the one that I gave you for Candace. In that profile, we build in a lot of errors. And we expect that the writer will take the time to try to figure out, well, what does that mean, instead of just including it because it was in the profile. So this was one of those situations where unless you actually knew what a certificate, a nonprofit executive management certificate is, this would be a good time to go check it out. So that's kind of the universal for all of these, and I'll just kind of skim through these really quickly. Again, this certification should be listed under education. It should be listed above the Bachelor of Science. The other thing that was interesting is this writer had once mentioned, and it was a terrible list. It was very hard to read, and this is exactly the way it appeared on the original resume. But the writer included in that big, long paragraph, completed a graduate-level class, and yet some of you actually cited it as graduate-level studies or courses or programs. It was a class. It was one class. It probably doesn't even need to be included. It's even possible that one class was something related to this nonprofit executive management certificate. So, don't build in more than what they're telling us. And again, think it through logically. Do I need to include that? Where do I need to include it? This one is combining the 2. There's that darn colon again. A little more white space would help in here. This one does start with the nonprofit certificate and the bachelor's, but this one little class probably wasn't even relevant enough to include. And then I like the way the writer here is just using, a sentence to describe the conferences and also to describe the chairmanships and the board and committee. Now, those probably should be included under a different heading because they really aren't education and certifications. Maybe the writer was planning on doing that. I don't know. This is the nice centering. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. This writer also indicated without more specifics, I wouldn't include the part about the attended numerous conferences. There's a good argument there as well as going back and including it this way. Either way, it's fine. Where you really want to make the distinction is if the client starts to insist that we include something that we weren't planning to include. You give the reason to the client, and then you give them what they want. This one formatted really nicely. I think a couple things stand out here. You've got D.C. here with the periods. You've got Virginia without the periods, and then you've got Oklahoma spelled out. Consistency. That's just more of what I'll talk about tonight, but that should have consistent punctuation. Consistent if you spell out the state, spell it out every time. And then whether or not you include the links, we'll talk about that one a little bit later when we talk about ATS. At this point, I'll just say fine with that. And let me see, this next one is using this bulleted format, which is a good way to kind of break up visually. As you'll see, there is a difference between the education and the additional coursework. This is all from the same resume. So I would say if you're going to use bullets here, use them up here too. And this is just more with formatting. And here's this crazy little period. I'm not sure why that's there, but just another one of those little proofreading oversights. And Lord knows I have my share of proofreading oversights. This one's nice, except for I think it's using up a little more space than what it needs to. And I would question the bolding of the major as opposed to the bolding of the actual degree. And the GPA. And I don't think this candidate had a date on there, so whether or not it's relevant to include the GPA, I can't really speak to. And then this one broke down the professional and community leadership. And then you've got these basic categories here at the end. So not going to spend much more time on that. We have so much to cover tonight. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to run through questions on this one. I hope everybody's okay with that. If you have a specific question or a comment about yours, and you want to just email me after class, I'll follow up with you. But we have a ton of stuff to cover, and now I only have 45 minutes, so I got to plan my time a little bit better. So I'm going to close these down. I'm opening up the PowerPoint presentation. I'll mute the line again, and I'll run through this. And maybe I'll just kind of skim over some of these points because I know that some of it is just really, really basic. But is the full slide up on the screen right now? Somebody say yes before I mute the line.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm going to mute the line, and I am going to run now. I'm going to run through this tonight as quick as I can. So, let me see if I can get this to click to the next slide. which would be nice. Okay, so here's the things we're going to cover tonight. The various style guides, the parts of speech. Oh, my God, you're going to feel like you're in grammar school again. What I really want to focus on is some of the common errors that we're seeing when we're grading samples and tests, and then some of those major challenges that resume writers face when they're working on documents, and which is what results in a lot of these common errors and easy fixes. So the first, and then I gave you some supplemental sheets. I'm not going to really go over those tonight, but I thought they'd be really helpful to you. That hyphen rules for 35 prefixes, I just got that yesterday or a day before. And it's just a great little checklist because, as you're going to see when we go forward, hyphens seems to be the thing that boggles writers the most, and I continue to struggle with them myself. And then one of our colleagues, Holly Genser, was nice enough to put together the two tip sheets, the one on how to insert symbols and the other one on how to put the accent marks over the E in resume. And the NRWA, we're still pretty picky about that because the word without the accent marks is resume, and we all know that they are two very different things. And then the punctuation and grammar, that's going to be the homework assignment. So I actually built this stuff in after teaching the class twice, and I think part of it has been an awareness for me. We promote the use of the Gregg Reference Manual as our style guide. Well, as I've gotten more and more involved with proofreading and grading, I've come to realize that there are many, many different style guides out there, and different style guides have different rules. So I think an important thing to keep in mind is sometimes you may get contradictory information about what's grammatically correct. So then the thing to keep in mind is what style guide is being referenced when someone is pointing out the error. So for us in our organization, and really the Gregg Reference Manual is probably one of the largest ones used or most frequently used by business professionals in their profession. The Gregg Reference Manual is what we're using. AP style guide used by journalists. There's medical style guides. There's all kinds. So things that they may handle differently are things like grammar issues, spelling issues. You all know that American and British spelling is different. I'm currently reading a book that is written in Britain, and I get distracted because words look like they're spelled incorrectly. And they're not. It's just a British book. Formatting issues, what font to use, how you're going to use it, where you're going to use it comes into play. And then, general recommendations, whether something is jargon or acceptable. So my recommendation is that if you do not have the Gregg Reference Manual and you're really serious about being an effective resume writer, make sure you get a copy. The 11th edition is what we're currently using, and my recommendation as we go through the class tonight and as you're working is start putting little flags on the sections of the book that you're referencing most often. Do not, I had one person in class say, I'd like to get certified. I've been reading the Gregg Reference Manual. Do not try to read the Gregg Reference Manual. It's almost 800 pages, and you don't need it all. But there are specific things you do need, and if you're like me, I would recommend noting the areas that are giving you the most trouble and marking them in the Gregg Reference Manual so that you can quickly go to them and reference them. So I've just listed here some various style guides. And then the Merriam-Webster Dictionary is the dictionary that complements the Gregg Reference Manual. Many times I'll get in a discussion with a writer who'll say to me, well, I Googled it, and the online dictionary told me this was right. Well, the online dictionaries are not always correct. So I highly recommend Merriam-Webster Dictionary, Gregg Reference Manual. They're books. Keep them by your desk. Keep them handy. Highlight, flag them, but don't just rely on online resources. There's far too many things that are out there that are incorrect. So when we're talking about rules versus style, grammar has hundreds of hard and fast rules. However, there are hundreds of issues that are dictated by style. Keep that in mind. And that's why a lot of times my answer is, it depends. Is it a rule or is it a style? If it's a style, is it a style that the NRWA adheres to, or is it a style that's being adhered to by some other organization or occupation? All right. The next couple of slides I wanted to share with you, this was actually a blog post that someone had sent me, and I thought it had some really significant information in there to really keep in mind. Good written communication skills are extremely important. And you know, as this blog says, a lot of the heavy lifting that we have to do at work and decision making, they happen over email. They happen over business correspondence. And rarely does an employee have an administrative assistant that's doing the writing for them. So as ghostwriters, we owe it to our clients to have them look good on paper. We have to be able to write well. It tends to correlate with good analytical skills. So, you know, this recruiter is saying employers are making judgments about the client based on the resume. And I think this next point is even more telling. A resume isn't something you write on the spot. And I am even though I know I make mistakes and that they slip by, I still really push hard against typographical errors, spelling errors, punctuation errors. You don't write a resume on the spot and turn it in. There's certainly enough time to set it down, go back to it later and review it and make sure that it's error-free. So, you know, like this is saying, if there's errors in there, it's actually communicating, this is everything I've ever done, this is what I'm proud of, this is the best I can do. And we don't want to give that message out to employers. As this recruiter said, when a company gets to be a certain size, they don't have the bandwidth to look at every resume and treat every applicant like a unique snowflake. So they're going to look at those resumes and they're going to make determinations based on a lot of what you're seeing in this little graphic here. This particular recruiter did a survey of resumes that were submitted by electrical engineers, and then they calculated the number of errors. And this is where the 87% of people who got the offers made two or fewer mistakes. And you'll see here's just a really nice example of the kinds of mistakes that often will show up. The last lesson that we have in this program, I'll be teaching you a lot about some of the proofreading strategies and even give you a technique to help you with your proofreading. And I'll walk you through that. I think it's our last lesson. So just for this parts of speech, the things that I included in here are the things that are relevant for you as a resume writer. So, you know, it's not the whole speech about what is a noun, what is a verb, but with each of these, I've just included a little tip about things to keep in mind while you're writing. The big ones here is the verb. Remember, in a resume, other than when you're listing education certifications, anytime you're listing a statement or a complete sentence, begin those sentences with action verbs. If they're current actions, present tense. If they're past actions, past tense. Not ing verbs. Those are not actually action verbs. They have a whole nother grammatical title, which I can't even think what it is right now. The other thing to keep in mind when you're writing the resume, the personal pronouns are assumed. You don't include them. When you're writing the cover letter, you do include them. So just keep those little tips in mind. Adjectives, don't use any more than 2 in a sentence. I was reviewing one writer's work once, and it was like reading a romance novel. It was just loaded with adjectives. The adverbs, keep it as close as possible to the word that's being modified, and don't use adverbs to express a meaning that's already there. And here's a couple of examples, and there's quite a long list. But if you finish, you don't have to say you finished up. It's either finished or it's not. You don't collaborate together. Collaborate means that you're doing something with other people. So just be careful of those little things. And I referenced a section in the Gregg Reference Manual that has a whole couple of pages of those troublesome adverbs and adjectives. Articles, those are the a, and the ones that we want to minimize as much as possible in the resume. That does not mean eliminate them completely. Some writers try to do that. There are times we need an article in order to make the sentence flow. But when you get your resumes written and you're ready to submit something for a sample review or the test, go back through it and see how many a, ands, and thes you can actually cross out. They don't really need to be there. Prepositions, those are a good example of how you can write tighter, more concisely. Get rid of those little words like by and in and of. You probably don't need them. We want to write tight. We want to write crisp. And when we start including a lot of superfluous words, we're not achieving that goal. This is a tricky one here too, and the best thing I can say about a, and, or but is it does get a little more complex than just a simple either the comma goes there or it doesn't. This is one of those areas where sometimes you may need to grab your reference manual and check, is this a situation where I do put the comma before the word and, or I don't? Is it a situation where I put the comma before or I don't? So you'll have to look that one up. The part about clauses, and this is a tricky one, the essential and non-essential. Essential means if I leave this phrase out, will it alter the meaning of the sentence? If it will, then it's an essential phrase. A non-essential is it may add extra information that could be included, but nothing would be lost if it wasn't. And where this really becomes important to know the distinction is when you get to this next slide where we're talking about commas and whether or not we use the comma. Insert a comma to set off non-essential clauses. Don't insert a comma to set off essential clauses. If you don't know what that means, this is one you're going to want to mark. You're going to need to look it up. And you're going to have to try to keep reminding yourself, does the comma go here or does it not go here? There's also this little thing called an Oxford comma or a serial comma. I had never heard of that until I was pursuing certification. But basically it's the comma that goes before and when you have a series. Back when I was in school, in grade school, high school, you never put a comma before and. Now the movement is towards, if you have a series, put the comma before and. It's not right or wrong to do it one way or the other. It's only wrong if you do it one way in one sentence and then later on in the resume you don't do it. So make a decision. You're either going to use the Oxford comma, the comma that comes before and, or you're not going to use it, and be consistent. The other one that trips up a lot of resume writers is periods. Because we learned in grade school that a sentence has a period at the end, and the sentence has a subject and a verb, and normally identifies the speaker with either a name or a pronoun. Because we write tight, it sometimes appears that our statements are not really sentences. So some writers choose to not put periods at the end. So the rule is, if it's a complete thought, then a period goes at the end. And I hope that that will be enough to help you to know. Complete thoughts typically, and where we see the error most frequently, is when people are writing bulleted accomplishment statements. You need a period at the end of those. You don't need a period after a line, though, that says, Bachelor of Science from the Johns Hopkins University. That's not a complete thought. That's just lines of information. So, complete thought. Hopefully that helps. Hyphens, this is, like I said, or not hyphens, colons. Don't capitalize the first word after a colon if the material that follows can stand alone as a sentence. Insert a colon on a cover letter after the greeting, not a comma, a colon. Semicolons take the place of conjunctions, and, but, or. So a lot of times you can tighten up your writing by connecting two independent thoughts with a semicolon. And the other place you use semicolons is when you have pairs of information that are all in a complete sentence. And the example here, you've got managed hiring and training. Rather than having all these managed hiring, comma, and training, comma, and budgeting, comma, it's grouping things into pairs, and each pair is separated by a semicolon. And I'm not expecting that you're going to remember all of this, but you'll at least know that we covered it, and you'll know where to go back and look when you do the homework assignment. This is hyphens. There's not a day that goes by that I don't sit and look at a word and try to figure out whether or not it's hyphenated. I have resources everywhere. I have my Gregg reference manual flagged, my dictionary, and they still continue to boggle me. So those resources I gave you hopefully will help. There's these situations like the first one where you've got a compound word versus a pair. There's a difference between follow up with a hyphen and follow up. There's a difference between start up with a hyphen and start up. Start up is never one word. There's a lot of writers that like to do that. It's never one word. Nonprofit. I have seen it repeatedly hyphenated in job announcements and blog posts and newspaper articles. No hyphen. Multi-million. Multi. No hyphens after those prefixes. Unless multi, the word that it's connected to, begins with I can't even think of the right letter now. I'm losing my mind. Anyhow, so if you do multi-million dollar, it's multi-million hyphen dollar. And then you've got these compound adjectives. Usually if you have two words that are defining a noun, it's a compound adjective, it gets hyphenated. However, there's many, many exceptions. So don't rely on what you think. Make a mental note like I've had to do. Always check to find out whether or not it's hyphenated. Dashes. This one is a tricky one, too. In resume writing, we actually use the N dash and the M dash. And I think this is new to a whole lot of writers. They're not aware of these. They're actually found in Microsoft Word under the Insert Symbol function. I gave you the one little handout that shows you how to create them. The N dash is what you put between dates, not a hyphen. There is no N dash on your keyboard. If you're connecting dates by hitting a key on your keyboard, you're not inserting an N dash. And we're real particular about that with the NRWA. And we're also particular about grammatically, there is no space before or after the N dash. Now, I can tell you my own personal little secret. I don't like the way that looks. And normally when I am writing for my clients, I put spaces before and after. But sometimes we have to dress up a little bit differently for different functions. So if your function is to pass the NCRW, whether you like the space before or after is irrelevant. Don't put the space. And a good way to remember the difference between the two is the N dash is the width of a letter N, the M dash is the longer one. And you can use that in place of a parentheses. You can use it in place of, a connecting conjunction. And I gave you a couple examples there. The apostrophes represent something that's missing. So like when you have don't instead of do not, the apostrophe is representing the missing O in not. When you write the sentence 20 years experience, the apostrophe is taking the place of the missing word of. So if you write that in a resume, either you need to include the apostrophe or you need to include the word of. But if it just says 20 years experience without the apostrophe, it's incorrect. Another area people get really tripped up is they love putting apostrophes over plural acronyms and plural abbreviations. They don't belong there. And then there's that situation of a lot of brand names, company names. Some use the apostrophe, some don't. You got Starbucks coffee without, you got Victoria's Secrets with. So there are many times when you're writing a resume, you may have to check out a company website, find out the way that we're doing it on the company site, write it the way they write it. I recently was reviewing, it wasn't an apostrophe situation, but I was reviewing a resume where the client worked at a company named Marsh McBurney. And Marsh McBurney was written as one word, and it was all lowercase. There was an inclination to mark that incorrect, so I Googled the company name, and throughout all of their literature, that was their brand. Marsh McBurney was one word, all in lowercase. So sometimes you've got to just have your little radar go up and go, wonder if the client wrote this correctly or if I should do a little bit of homework. Then there's the accent marks. I've already covered that. Ampersands, this is a tricky one. They're okay in headings. We do have one grader on the NCRW commission who hates them. If you should run into that grader, she'll probably call them out. But there really is no rule that says you can't use an ampersand in a heading. There is a rule, though, that you don't use it in a salutation, you don't use it in a street address, and you never, ever use it in a sentence or a complete thought in place of the word and. So, again, one space before, one space after, and don't use it if you're doing a series, as we had in that example. Next one is this /. There's a lot of discussion about that's still going around, and I keep seeing it both ways. Grammatically, according to the dictionary, according to the Gregg Reference Manual, no space before or after the /. Now, a lot of writers have made the argument that, well, the ATS can't read it without the space. Well, all the recent research on ATS indicates that although that may have been an issue with older applicant tracking software, it is no longer an issue. So to be grammatically correct, do not include a space before and after. And in writing our resumes, probably we would not use the and/or situation very often, but where you may use the slashes, / most frequently is when you're doing a competency list. So instead of saying sales and marketing, budget and financing, you could use the slash. And if you have any questions, I'm not going to break probably until the end, so if you have questions, you jot them down, and then we'll see how much time we have left. Some other general writing tips here. Be careful about including the word that's already represented by the acronym. So ATM stands for Automated Teller Machine. You don't write Automated Teller Machine. You don't write Standard Operating Procedure. So be careful with your acronyms that you understand what the acronym is representing, because sometimes clients don't, and they give us stuff that has mistakes. And it's just, we have to be on our toes with those things and, not take it for granted that the client was representing the information correctly. If you're using an acronym and it's the first time you use it, unless it's a very, very common acronym, spell it out the first time. Put the acronym in parentheses. Then later on, you can go ahead and just use the acronym if the word comes up again in your writing. With states, if you choose to abbreviate the state, it's always the two-letter capital. Not the way I learned back when I was in school in California was uppercase C, lowercase ALIF, period. Maryland was uppercase M, lowercase d, period. Whether or not you use the abbreviation or you spell it out, one way or the other is not right or wrong. It's only incorrect if you're not consistent. And I leave that back even to the letterhead. If you're going to spell out the state and the client's letterhead, spell it out with each of the companies. You may start out spelling it out and suddenly realize that spelling out Massachusetts is taking up too much space and it's kicking text down to another line. Then you go back and you adjust everything. So don't change just to make it fit one place. Be consistent. Another one, geographic abbreviations that are made of single letters require a period. They don't require a period, as you can see with states, because states are abbreviated according to the post office standards. It's a little bit confusing, but the note to make in your mind, particularly US, UK, those are the ones that we see most frequently. All right, some other writing tips to keep in mind. Titles of companies and organization officials. Oh, my God, this one is constantly boggles writers and us graders. Do you capitalize the job title? Do you not capitalize it? Well, if it follows or replaces a personal name, then when they follow or replace a personal name or when they stand alone, do not capitalize them. So if you're talking about being promoted to the senior accountant, it doesn't get capitalized. But if you're talking about Doug Barnes, senior accountant, then it does get capitalized because it's part of his title. General terms like board of directors. If you're saying she prepared an agenda for the board of directors, it's not capitalized. If you're saying that the board of directors meeting is on, now you're referring to it as a formal term. there's also, if you go in the Gregg Reference Manual, it even says that if the organizational term applies to the organization where the writer currently is, you capitalize it. If it applies, or you don't capitalize it. If it applies to another organization, you do. My statement here is a lot like I said with the hyphens. Look it up. Look it up. If you're getting ready to capitalize something, unless you are dead certain, look it up and make a decision. This one here, type of degree. If you're speaking of someone having a Bachelor of Science degree, like in your cover letter, I graduated from XYZ college with a Bachelor of Science degree, does not get capitalized. However, if you're using it as a degree that you're stating under education, you do capitalize it. So there's always those, it depends. In government terms, this one we see frequently done incorrectly. People love to capitalize federal. It doesn't get capitalized unless it's part of the name of a federal agency. Same thing with state. And then there's this little thing I love. My virtual assistant finds me the most wonderful graphics. It's an actual term, camel case, and it's that uppercase letter that appears in the middle of a word. And I gave you the 2, 3 here that we are most familiar with. I see a lot of mistakes in resumes where writers either made PowerPoint 2 words, or they neglected to capitalize a letter in the middle of the word. This is a tricky one that just requires you to be on your toes. Numbers, the common errors, and really what I want to bring out here, this has been somewhat of a shift. The old rule has always been if numbers 10 and below get spelled out. We are now shifting towards writing more consistently or concisely, and it is perfectly fine to write the number in numeric fashion instead of the word, as long as you're being consistent throughout the resume. If you choose to go back to the old standard of numbers 10 and below get spelled out, then that's where you may want to look at this particular slide and make a determination about the exception. One of the advantages of not spelling it out, though, is, like I say, it's a tighter writing. It may give you the needed room that you need to get a sentence on one line instead of breaking it off. I have no idea why "and" has a black A on this slide. And it's interesting because I not only proofread this, but I had someone on my proofreading team proofread it. So it goes to show we can make mistakes. Other things, current positions, when you talk about verb tense, if you're talking about a current job, a place where the client is currently employed, there may be a mixture of tenses. You may start out with recruited to XYZ and then switch over to what he or she is currently doing. So it's okay to mix with current positions. Previous positions, the verbs are always past tense. There's no question about it. If it's an accomplishment, something that was completed, it's done, then it's past tense. If it's a contribution, something the client is currently doing, it could be present tense, or if they already contributed it, it can be past. So you've got to make distinctions there. And again, just to remind you, never use ing verbs on the resume because we use active verbs and ing are passive verbs. Resumes written in the first person, I think you all know that. The other one, and clients love to challenge us on this, verbs not only should not have ing, but they also shouldn't have the S's at the end. So if you put an S at the end, you're indicating that someone else is the speaker. So And clients always love to say to me, well, shouldn't that say possesses? And actually, I need to backtrack on something I just told you with ing verbs. I'm talking about at the beginning of a sentence. Do not begin a sentence with ing verbs. I have to clear that up because I really misspoke. If you were to say something like tasked with or created policies and procedures for recruiting, hiring, and training, that's perfectly fine. But you don't use the ing to actually start the sentence. And I am sorry I misspoke on that one, and I hope that doesn't come back and haunt me. Other common errors that we see, not, as I mentioned before, this lack of concise writing. Get rid of all those extras. And I gave you an example here of a sentence that has far too many conjunctions in it. Won't bother to read that for you because we're short on time and I know you can all read. Get rid of those wordy phrases. Again, it looks like my proofreader missed something because the box shifted. Oh, this really bothers me. Some of the common wording phrases, and also, as to whether, due to the fact that. I hate seeing these words in resumes, including but not limited to. We don't normally talk that way, and we definitely don't want to write that way when we're trying to write type. Redundancies. This is another really tricky one, and it may be something that you'll want to pay attention to. And now that once I've gotten through this lesson, I'll be going back and looking at your baseline documents, and I'll cite some of the common errors that I'm seeing in your baseline document. If you don't have any, that's great. But some writers tend to have a lot of redundancies. Other writers tend to have a lot of problems with capitalization and hyphens. I want you to know what your common challenges are so that you can nip them in the bud during this class. So I will go back through this. Redundancies is a big one. That's when you use the same word or derivative of the word in the same sentence. And I gave you a couple of examples here of where they show up. Also, if you have a bulleted list of items, check at those bulleted lists. Don't have any two sentences start with the same action verb because it's redundant. And, there's plenty of words in the English dictionary that you can substitute something. Bulleted accomplishments, I already said, and then stringing together two different word phrases or words that mean the same thing. Like established a new team. Well, if you established it, that means it wasn't there before, so it's new. You don't have to call it a new team, just established team of service representatives. Cliches. This is a real big one, and this really elevates your writing. This goes back, I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when we just kept using words like proven performer with solid track record of success, self-motivated professional, big picture person, out-of-the-box thinker, seasoned employee. I could go on and on. If you've been reading a lot of resumes, you may begin to pick up on them. If I find that you're using them in your writing with your homework, I'm going to let you know, this is passé. Let it go. We're tired of that cliche. It went away with disco dancing and leisure suits. Don't use cliches. There's a whole lot of words that we can use rather than saying he's a proven performer with a solid track record. How about presenting an accomplishment to illustrate that, or self-motivated? So work out sentences that communicate that message without using an empty cliche. Oh, parallel structure. Oh, my God, I never even heard of this until I tried to get certification, and this is where I really wish I had more time tonight. Parallel structure boggles minds more than anything in writing, and there's that term, gerund is what an ing verb is. I'll call this out in your homework, and I'll look for it in your baseline. And what I would say is I may have to revisit this because I don't want to keep you on the phone all night tonight. But pay attention to these next couple of slides. This one is where I introduce the concept of parallel structure, where it shows up, tends to show up in sentences as well as in bulleted list. And then the next couple of slides will take you through the steps of actually correcting non-parallel structure. The main thing to look at when you're looking at a sentence is, does the verb that you use apply to each piece of that sentence separately? So if you take this sentence, create and support, what do they create and support? Annual fundraising programs. How do they do it? Through hands-on leadership, through knowledgeable of solicitation cycles. So I hope you can see right away we have a disconnect. You can't put through knowledgeable of solicitation. It could be through hands-on leadership, knowledge, or solicitation cycles, or expertise in solicitation cycles, but not knowledgeable of. And as I say, I wish I had more time. I'm skimming over probably the hardest part of this whole lesson. But I have a 3-step approach here. I encourage you to take the time to look through that. I've got some more examples in here. The misplaced modifiers, I think there's a couple that are in the homework assignment. It's when you are using a noun or noun phrase to modify something, but you're not putting it next to the thing that it's modifying. So you'll see some examples here. Word usage. This is another funny one, and one of the tests that I was just grading this week, this writer was using big words that the writer clearly didn't understand what the word meant, but kept using these words that I guess, they thought they were interesting and they'd heard them said. I think acumen and matrix environment are two of the most common ones I see. If you don't know what those words mean, then they should be integrated into the resume. Don't make the assumption that you know what it means. There are times, even though I've been writing resumes for years, where I have to stop and go, well, no, wait a minute. Before you say a word, what does that word mean? And then look it up. So, unfortunately, I had to fail a test just this week because there were a lot of words that just didn't make sense in the sentences they were in. This is a big challenge. I already had mentioned the startup and the startup, but here's some perfect examples of words that we constantly see show up in resumes that are being used incorrectly. The one that I see most often is this ensure, which means that guarantee, you ensure that, deadlines were met. Insure, which means you're taking insurance out on something. And assure, which means you're making something, you're giving something confidence. You're helping it to feel better. So you don't assure a deadline is met, and you don't insure a deadline is met, but you do ensure. So be careful of that one. That one we see more than any of them. I would love to read this to you out loud, but I'm not going to do that because it is getting late. I know you can all read. But just for the fun of it, after class, read it out loud. And you can hear in this quotation the choppy sentences and the run-on sentences. And the message here is that when we're writing, write with rhythm and flow. Combine short sentences with long ones. Don't make them all short and choppy. And don't make them go on and on. Blend them together. You'll get a nice flow. Read your resumes out loud. See how they sound. If more writers did that, we would eliminate a lot of the problems like this one that I saw on a test just this week. It's the first sentence of a cover letter, and it says, a vice president in the B2B sales industry, I have the ability to cultivate success and inspire sales teams in the driving factor in stimulating and sustaining revenue. If it's hard to read, it's not a well-written sentence. So run-on sentences, here's three different ways that you can eliminate them. Another area, and I know I'm breezing through this, guys, so thank you for staying on the phone with me. The awkward or unclear sentences. There are so many times when I'm proofreading that I have to stop and go, I don't know what that sentence meant. This is where it really, again, it helps if you read your stuff out loud or have someone else read it. If it doesn't make sense, then it needs to be corrected. And the examples that I gave here are all examples of sentences that were either very cumbersome or you can't tell what they really mean when you read them. What is the writer trying to say when they say meticulous attention to detail and highly organized, previously holding positions requiring double-checking of own work and peers? Are they double-checking the peers? Are they double-checking their work? What are they doing that they were double-checking? And it's a very convoluted, confusing, unclear sentence. So, there we go. Quick review. I'm going to unmute the line. If you need to hang up, you please feel free to do that. If you want to stay and ask questions, challenge anything I said, you're welcome to do that. I'll stay as long as you want to. I did want to tell you about a couple of awesome little resources. DailyWritingTips.com. It is a monthly subscription. I have it set up so that it comes out of my PayPal account every month. I don't have to think about it. This is probably one of the most amazing resources I've ever come across. Every day in my email, I get an article about a particular grammatical issue. In and of those articles, I learn so much. But at the end of each article, every day is a little quiz. And every day, I take those quizzes. And every day, I get errors. And it keeps me on my toes. Rarely do I get, and there's always only 5 questions in the quiz. Rarely do I get all 5 of them correct. It's a very humbling experience, and it really helps me to realize I just can't trust my instincts. Well, I can't trust what I know. I have to trust my instincts. I have to stop. I have to question. I have to grab the Gregg Reference Manual or the dictionary. I can't just go with what I've seen or what I've heard. So if you want to make the investment, I think it's going to be an excellent investment for you. And then the Grammar Girl blog, this one is a free blog that you can subscribe to at quickanddirtytips.com. She also has some really awesome things that appear. I think this one comes once a week as opposed to once a day. It's a quick read, and if you see a particular topic, you click on that, and it will take you to the complete article. But either one of these, I think, are great resources. Next week, we're going to actually start taking apart the resume. We're going to go section by section. So next week, we're going to look at the first piece of the professional experience section, and it's what we call the job description. The job description is not the thing that HR writes up. It's that summary of what the client did in the job. So that's what we're going to cover in depth next week. And then the following week, we'll look at the second piece of the professional experience section, which is the accomplishment bullets. So I am going to unmute the line. I'll keep the recording going because a lot of times there's valuable learning and sharing in the questions. Again, if you have to jump off the line, I perfectly understand, and thank you to those of you who stayed on. I'll run through the roll call, and we'll make sure if you're on the line, you have a question or comment, you have a chance to speak. So, Mark, are you still with us? And hopefully you didn't run out of speed.
No, I'm still here, but I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. It was a lot of stuff, though, wasn't it, Mark?
Yes, actually it was, but it was useful.
Yeah, this is probably the one slide presentation you may want to punch holes in and keep handy. Stick it in your Greg reference manual or something. But yeah, thank you. Brenda, how about you?
No, my head is spinning, but I'm good.
Yours and mine both. I got a lot of steps in while I was presenting tonight. You guys don't know it, but I paced the whole time I'm talking. Tiffany Roberts.
No question yet. I'm sure I'll have it later.
Okay, all right. I apologize, guys. I should have gone a little shorter on the intro today. Suzanne?
I'm ready for a nap.
I bet you are. I'm ready for dinner. How about you, LJ?
I'm ready to relook at my baseline. So they're all good. All
Maybe that's what I
good tools.
Everybody from homework is they should go through and correct their own work and send it to me. That may come up, but yeah, what I'm going to try to do this week is to go through your baselines, and what I'll do is I'll highlight errors and then call out some of the things that I see that you're consistently doing. And then that way you'll know what you should be marking in your Greg reference manual and your dictionary. Because, unless somebody points them out, we may not even know that we're doing them. So I'll take the time and I'll do that, is just send you back your baseline resume with things highlighted. And then hopefully that'll begin to make you become a little more aware. Okay, good. Thanks. How about you, Ronnie? Are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm here, but no, I have no questions, or I have too many, and I don't know which ones they are.
This is like a marathon tonight. Thank you so much, everybody, for sticking with me. Sheila? Nothing from Sheila. How about Tiffany Bidding? And Doug?
No, I'm fine. This is a useful refresher. A lot of this is in the study guide for the NCRW.
Yeah. Have you gotten a new copy of the study guide?
I think mine is probably 3 months old.
Oh, okay. Well, we just released the new one. I'm not sure if it's on the website yet. The new one has so much more information in it than the old one, and it has bulleted items, so you don't have to read through paragraphs and piece it all together. So I want to make sure that when the new one gets published, you all trash the old one. Don't use it anymore, because the new one is a tremendous improvement.
The new one wasn't posted a couple days ago, so.
It wasn't? Okay. Yeah, I followed up with Andrea earlier this week, and she has it on her to-do list for the week. So when it gets published, I'll let you know. And then Christina.
I'm good. I don't have any questions immediately, thanks.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to say, and I'll remind you this in an email message,